Hello, this is Mrs. Taylor, and I'm going to walk you through how to divide a polynomial using long division. So, long division is a method you should be familiar with from elementary school, but just in case, we reviewed it in class. And we can use that same method that you used with just numbers in elementary school to divide polynomials. So I'm going to set it up the same way. Whatever is to the left of the division symbol, that's called your dividend. And then to the right, that's your divisor. So you're dividing by t plus 2, making it the divisor. And the way we set it up is we put our divisor out front, and then we create our little division bar, and we put our dividend inside. And now, to proceed from there, I look at first terms. So, my first term here, my divisor is t, and my first term for my dividend is t cubed. And so I can go about this two ways. I can either think, okay, what do I multiply t by to get t cubed? Or I can just divide it and get there more efficiently. So I could say, okay, t cubed over t, well, using my exponent rules, 3 minus 1 is 2, so that's t squared. And so I know I would multiply t by t squared to get t cubed. All right, so for that step, you just ignore the plus 2. You just look at first terms. But now, the next step, you can't ignore the plus 2. You have to distribute what you wrote up here to each of these terms. So t squared times t is t cubed, and t squared times 2 is 2t squared. And with long division, you subtract. Now, here's where students make mistakes. They understand to do t cubed minus t cubed, but they forget to subtract this term here. So remember, it's negative 6t squared minus 2t squared. And so negative 6 minus 2 would be negative 8. And then you bring your t squared. Those are like terms. I can combine those. And then you drop down whatever was left in your dividend that didn't get anything subtracted from it. So the plus 1. And then I start that process over. I look at first terms only. So my first term here is t. My first term there is negative 8t squared. Again, I can write it as a division problem and figure out what I need to multiply by. And then that would be what I write up here next to the t squared. So if I multiply negative 8t by t, I get negative 8t squared. So now, again, same process. I take whatever I wrote up here and I distribute it. Negative 8t times t is negative 8t squared, and negative 8t times 2 is negative 16t. And again, we're subtracting. So negative 8t squared minus negative 8t squared. Well, minus a negative becomes plus. Those are opposites. That equals 0. Now, here's something a little different than the previous subtraction that I did. This says negative 16t, but there's no t term up here. So what do you do in that case? Well, you just drop it down. There's nothing to subtract it from, so you just bring it down. But remember, it's minus negative 16. So that makes it plus 16t when I drop it. And then the plus 1 gets dropped as well. One more time, repeat that process. So I have a t, a 16t. To get t to be 16t, you multiply by 16. So that's my next term up here. I distribute that 16. So 16t, and then 16 times 2 is 32. And then I'm going to subtract that as well. 16t minus 16t is 0. And 1 minus 32 is negative 31. Now, when I reach the point where I just have a number, it could be 0, which means there's no remainder. But if there's a number there and no variable, what I am to do is consider that a remainder. Because t, no matter what I multiply it by, will never equal negative 31. So, this is part of my answer. So t squared plus plus t squared minus 8t plus 16. But I must also include my remainder. And so the way I do that is I write it as a quotient. It's negative, so I'm going to write minus. And then I put the remainder on top and then my divisor on the bottom. So the t plus 2. And that would be my result from dividing that polynomial by that binomial. And that's how you use long division.